there's this myth, particularly among American Muslims and converts, that there's this pure, pristine Islam, there's this pure, pristine Muslim community, and that people's culture interferes. They put culture into Islam, and they'll say, that's not Islam, that's culture. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, guess what? It's always been culture. You've never been able to free culture in Islam. And 9 times out of 10, culture is going to outweigh religion.
It's always going to be an interpretive lens.
It's always going to be interpreted through culture, through your cultural context, and the context of where you are. So this myth that Muslims are one, there's no difference, we're just dividing ourselves over culture, is a myth, because you cannot separate culture from your religious understanding. Even the whole idea of saying that is an indication of your cultural context. The Muslim community is, like every other community, dependent on your socioeconomic class, on your ethnicity, on your race, where you're living, what time period you're in. All these things have a huge impact. And so to erase all that and say we're just universal, we're the same, we have the same experience, we have the same worldview, and it's only our cultures that are dividing us, misses the forest for the trees. We understand religion via our cultural context. So I cannot be a Saudi, I cannot be a Turk, I cannot be a Malay. I certainly have no animosity towards them. I certainly can have friendship and learning from them, but we're all understanding Islam through our cultural context. Our cultural context. Now, another thing that comes in, we are all one ummah.
Peace, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Talk Podcast. I'm Tehran, joined by my brilliant co-host Roxana, and today we have a special guest back for a third time, Umar Lee, who is a prolific writer, thinker, and someone who deeply engages in the intersection of faith, culture, and politics. In this episode, we'll dive into a number of topics, such as the evolution of the Salafi movement in America, as explored in Matthew D. Taylor's book, Scripture People, and discuss the challenges of navigating faith structures after leaving rigid ideologies. We'll also reflect on Umar's experience in Indonesia and his thoughts on Revolusi, a book written about Indonesia, plus the future of Muslim political engagement in the U.S. But yeah, that's not it. We'll also tackle some sensitive issues within the Muslim community, like the recent abuse scandals, and what they mean for accountability. And we'll also, lastly, dive into Dr. John Andrew Morrow's book, Islam and Slavery. So yeah, this is going to be a packed conversation, so let's get into it. And so, yes, Umar, nice to have you back on our platform. You're always a welcome guest. We love hearing your insights. But, to kick the conversation off, it's been about 20 years after you've written the book, The Rise and Fall of the Salafi Dawah. And you've had a unique vantage point when it comes to understanding the movement, Salafism, within the United States. Let's start by exploring how the movement has evolved since you've written that book. And how has Salafism shaped Muslim American identity? I mean, what do you think mainstream narratives often get wrong about its broader cultural impact? Because, sometimes I feel like Salafism, because of Wahhabism, is like the whipping boy of the Muslim community sometimes, and wrongfully so in many respects. And I just wanted to get your thoughts, having watched the movement evolve over the past, 30 plus years. What is your view on it?
I think people get a lot of things wrong. Even I think it was overall a good book, but even Matthew Taylor got some things wrong in Scripture People, even though it was a solid book overall. And I think Salafis are a whipping post because if you can look at many of the negative behaviors people attribute to Salafis, and they're definitely guilty of many of those behaviors ascribed to them, are also behaviors shared by Sunni fundamentalists, Sufi, Shiis, etc. These are the behaviors of alternative religious fundamentalist communities. They kind of silo themselves. So it's not unique to the Salafi Dawah. You can look at the some of the most extreme groups in the history of the United States within the Muslim community have not been Salafi. Matter of fact, few of them have. Um, another example, the Washington Post, if you read, I believe her name is Justine Howe, wrote the book Suburban Islam, about a third space. And in that book, they repeatedly interviewed people who said that they were moving away from Salafiyya and moving away from Wahhabism and these pre 9/11 notions that they have. And they repeatedly mentioned that Hamza Yusuf was, quote unquote, using Wahhabi rhetoric prior to 9/11. Of course, that's absurd. Hamza Yusuf was never a Wahhabi, never a Salafi, never someone influenced by Saudi Arabia. He studied in Mauritania. He always had that Maliki, Sufi worldview, and religious view. So everything bad is attributed to Salafis. Whereas even if they say misgendering people, they'll even miss Salafi people. That if someone commits something bad, they'll say they're a Salafi. This person may or may not have been Salafi. Now, how the movement evolved, I would say that in the Black community, where the growth really was, Islam has declined in popularity. The number of conversions has went down. And I attribute a lot of that to just the general secularization of the Black community, which kind of hit a generation later for Black Americans than it did for white Americans. I think the growth of the Black Hebrew Israelites has taken the steam out of some of the demographics that Islamic Dawah had traditionally been strong in.
If I can also add that the Afrocentrists have grown in popularity, and their engagement with certain historical events that had happened in Muslim history that affected people that, Muslims in their Dawah tend to not always highlight.
And people like Dr. Umar Johnson, who grew up Muslim, Muslim father, grew up in the heart of Black Salafi and really the heart of Black Islam in America in North Philadelphia, no longer identifies as Muslims. And as a Muslim says that, Black Americans are imitating Arab culture, they're dressing like Arabs, etc. I've seen a lot of Muslims critique Dr. Umar Johnson online because of that, who may or may not be familiar with Philadelphia.
Right.
I know exactly what he's talking about. The Arabization of Black Muslims in Philadelphia, which can turn people off, and it does turn people off. And the other factor is he uses a phrase, I was Orthodox Muslim.
Right.
And so you had a lot of non-Black Muslims, and they're saying there's no such thing as an Orthodox Muslim. Orthodox Muslim is an old term within Black Islam used to differentiate yourself from the Nation of Islam. Instead, you say, no, I'm not nation, I'm Orthodox.
Right.
And so it was kind of an understanding at that time. You don't really hear it as much anymore, but you used to hear these terms Orthodox and indigenous a lot. Now, but how the existing Salafi community has grown is that you have two divides. You have a quote unquote immigrant Muslim community, using this term vaguely because many are now second and third generation. Whereas I see Salafiyya is much less popular than it used to be, has much less energy. But movement Salafiyya is largely absent, but understood Salafiyya is still there. Salafi norms are still there. So if you look at Omar Suleiman, who is by far and away the most popular imam in America, he has no rival. He was essentially a Salafi. If you go to his Masjid Valley Ranch Islamic Center, services are conducted in a way that are Salafi, that are the way people are educated in Medina and educated in Salafi institutions conduct their prayer services. There's no Mawlid, there's no dua after Salat, there's no dhikr. So all these things that we ascribe to Salafiyya are in the norm. They're in the mainstream of the American Muslim community without the movement Salafi. You see, Yasser Burgess is not at Valley Ranch screaming, I'm a Salafi and these deviants and Ahlul Bid'ah. But if you ask him religious questions, he'll give you Salafi answers.
Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting that you say that, because you're not the only person who has said it. I mean, speaking with Dr. Morrow off the record, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this, but he said the same thing when he first became a Muslim. Oh, when with the Muslims he engaged with after the fact, thinking about it, like, these were actually, even though they didn't identify as Salafi, that Salafi mindset has pervaded into many
It's
aspects.
pervaded into the American mainstream that this is just the way we organize our community. Talib Abdul Malik, the father of Hamza Abdul Malik, who's one of the first African Americans to graduate from Al-Azhar, he's imam in Memphis now at the Midtown Mosque. His father, Talib, a native St. Louisan, has said that many people are Salafi without knowing it.
Right.
Salafi without knowing it. So if you ask them their opinions on Salafis, they say, no, I don't like Salafis, because they see movement Salafis as hostile, as aggressive, as divisive. But then you analyze their understanding of Islam and look at their Islamic library. It's all from Dar es Salaam Publications and Bilal Phillips, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Salafis without knowing. So Salafia really is mainstream American Islam.
Mm-hmm. But how do you think it has such a cultural impact? Because just thinking about it, the more popular speakers nowadays are of a more Salafi.
It's really always been the case.
Umar Lee, Yasser Qadi. You can even throw Jonathan Brown in there. I mean, as well. It's very. Well, how do you think they've come, that way of seeing Islam came to have such a cultural impact?
Well, obviously we have in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, up until 2001, we had a lot of Saudi money and support for the growth and propagation of the Salafi Dawah in the US, UK, Canada, etc. And so that was a big factor. And I think they really planted the seeds. But now it doesn't even need Saudi money. It's just kind of generational now and passed down. And I think that people see Salafi Islam, small s, as kind of non-denominational. So we have this diverse Muslim community. Not everybody's a Hanafi, a Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, but everybody's a Muslim. And so we can, if we have Mawlid, it's going to be divisive. There's going to be a community fight. If we do dhikr together, there's going to be a public fight. And so Salafi is so normative and mainstream, the small s, not the big S, because that's divisive, that if we just do things these ways and don't rock, we won't rock the boat. If you go to St. Louis, I wanted to do Mawlid last year. And the only masjid, including the Bosnians, which are traditional Hanafi, Sufi culture, they didn't advertise a Mawlid. No one did a public Mawlid at the 25 masjids in St. Louis other than the Turks. Mm. And I started asking people in other cities, and people were saying, yeah, I don't know where to go here, unless you're at some place that's explicitly Sufi. If you're in some places explicitly Sufi, like Shadi Musri's place in New Jersey or Zaytuna or Talif, you will. But that's very much the exception. It's very much the exception in American Islam. So small S Salafi is very much alive. Even as the motherland, Saudi, is transforming under MBS, under His Excellency Turki al-Sheikh, who's taking over boxing. That's my man, because I'm a boxing guy. The motherland, and I think that may have an impact, a downstream impact. But the old core, hardcore Salafis are very marginal at this point, and they're still strong in segments of the Black American Muslim community. And I would venture most Black American Muslims, say 55 and under, are either Salafi without knowing it or Salafi and very much knowing it. Mm. But in the non-Black American Muslim community, there have been other movements that have become popular. First of all, it's no longer as taboo to be Sufi as it once was. And second, you have the Neo-Ottomans, the Mad Mamluks crowd, who, the whole Erdogan and the whole 9 yards. This is a competitor as the Saudis have stepped out they have stepped in. And of course, uh, Salafis have seen uh, among the educated crowds attacks from Ikhwan Muslimin, where there's kind of this, some people are Salafi Ikhwan, and some people are very Salafi and anti-Ikhwan, and somebody, so it's a very complex relationship, but that's also a factor.
And how do you see the geopolitical situation in the Middle East impacting how Salafism evolves in the States?
That's a very good question, because American Salafi is very different than UK Salafi. American Salafis are traditionally apolitical, quietists. So the quietist branch of Salafi. So a lot of American Salafis, movement Salafis, I'm talking about the movement Salafis. I say movement. They don't. I refer to them as movement Salafis. Are woefully unaware of international politics. Mm. If you were to talk about some of the developments in Saudi Arabia, because they don't watch the news, and say, well, who told you that? Where'd you read that? And you would say, in the media. What? You can believe some Jews in the media that there was a rave in Saudi Arabia, something like that, right? So that they're so woefully out of it in terms of politics, in terms of international news coverage, that they, I don't think they're aware of the nuance. I'm talking about movement Salafis. UK obviously very different, because you have a different strand of Salafiyya, more Seruris, political Salafiyya, that are very much affected, and they're closer geographically as well. They don't have this big ocean in between. But take away the movement Salafis, the small S Salafi, where there's so many political currents that are impacting Muslims. You have the neo-Ottomanism, the love of Erdogan, the love of Turkey, this feeling that he is reconstituting the Ottoman Empire, which is pure fantasy, not attached to any form of reality, but there is that sentiment amongst a slice of the American Muslim community and the British Muslim community. And then you have the situation in Pakistan, which is a huge issue among Pakistanis who are one of the biggest groups, if not the biggest group. Where do you stand on Imran Khan? That's a huge issue. Then you throw in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and everyone has their narrative that they are the most pro-Palestinian. Shia will say, Iran has led the resistance, et cetera, et cetera. The neo-Ottomans will say Erdogan is playing chess, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone has their narrative, including the Saudis, that we've given more money to the Palestinians than anyone. So everyone can kind of shape their narrative, and the current politics, including in Syria, goes into everyone's narrative. Because as Syria is blowing up again, we have to remember that many of the people that have been championed in the past year as great defenders of Palestinians were people that were very divisive. People like Rania Khalid, et cetera, for being very close to Assad in Syria. So where you stand on Syria is a very impactful to how you view these movements. And Salafis, if they enter the equation on Syria, is usually at a very bad place, and that's why I'm very skeptical of everything I see there. But obviously we're not divorced. American Muslims are probably the most global community in America, because very few people in America pay attention to international events.
I wasn't exposed to none of these things until I became a Muslim.
Exactly.
2013, I had to ask some Syrian girl, "Hey, what's going on in Syria?"
Everybody's
talking about. She looked at me like I was crazy.
Most Americans don't even have passports. They can get them,
I didn't have a passport until
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wanted to go meet my wife the first time, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, you know what I'm
after I
saying?
was Muslim.
So,
So,
like, you know, I mean, for myself, like, no one in my family. I have a sister who went on a cruise, another sister went to like Cancun, but like just like outside of the elite of America, like regular blue collar Americans don't really travel.
yeah.
We don't really go nowhere. You know what I'm saying?
That's why I
But
tell people like Californians, we go to Tahoe on a
yeah,
3-day weekend.
yeah,
That's the most you're gonna get out of Californians
yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
So
But the UK is different because you can get on the train, get on the Ryanair, get on the bus. You can go all over Europe. You can go to Morocco. I mean, the Europeans, they have a greater ease of travel.
yeah, right. And it's still something that I need to get used to. I mean,
Yeah,
just I had to forego like 7 days of vacation because I didn't use them up, and it's coming towards the
right.
year.
I
And
use all of my days, brother.
man, in the States, you don't get any kind of time off depending on what you do. And so it's something I need to
Yeah,
get used to. But yeah, just moving forward, you were also interviewed for the book we mentioned in the introduction, Scripture People by Matthew
yes,
Taylor,
yes,
where he draws parallels between the Salafi movement and evangelical
yeah,
Christians in America. Do you
yeah.
feel the book captured the complexities of the Salafi movement, or do you think there were key voices or nuances that were oversimplified or overlooked?
Yes and no. I think he did a really good job talking about the evangelical scripture people because that's his background, and I think he understands that community a lot better than he understands Salafis or Muslims. So I found that part of the book very informative. Um, when people write about Salafis, they usually focus on Yasir Qadhi for some reason.
Hmm.
And it reminds me of back in the day, you may get some square in the suburbs and say, do you know hip hop? And they'll say, yeah, I know Will Smith and I know Vanilla Ice, who were very mainstream pop artists. Yasir Qadhi is not all that to Salafis. You know what I'm saying? He's like, he's a very controversial figure among Salafis, but he was never like this kind of beacon of, wisdom with it. I mean, he was a figure. He had his audience. He had the El Maghrib Institute, but he was never the defining person for American Salafis. The second thing is he interviewed me. We went to Buffalo Wild Wings, and he spent a lot of time on Iffy, who is a West African convert blogger who's a lesbian. And he interviewed somebody else. I can't remember who it was. But he didn't interview anybody or any leadership or attendees of what is the heart and soul of the American Salafi community. That's Black American Salafis. So if you're going to write a book about Salafis, why can't you interview Mufti Munir? Why can't you interview Shadid Muhammad, Tahir Wyatt, Mustafa George? Why can't you interview these Black American Salafi imams? Why can't you go to Germantown, Philly? Why don't you go to Masjid al-Rahma in Newark? Why can't you go to Masjid Quran wa Hadith in DC? And I know why. It's the same reason other academics don't go, is because they don't have a lot of familiarity and comfort in the Black community.
Hmm.
This gets into another book I just read by Musa El Garbi, We Were Never Woke, that when they do write about the Black community, their ambassadors and representatives tend to be people a lot like them, college educated, of a similar socioeconomic class, often of mixed race, often the children of financially successful immigrants. But to go into Black Salafia, you got to go in the trenches. You got to go in the hood. And I'm not sure if someone like Matthew Taylor or most academics are all that comfortable physically to go to Germantown, Philly for anything.
You don't think European academics have those same hangups when they write
They're
about?
not as bad. And the book that Sadiq Hamid, I believe his name is, did that in the UK
Yeah,
was a
over
good
at
book
Wales.
because he's a Muslim. He's not scared to hang out in the slums of Birmingham and London. He can go to the people. American academics are a lot more prissy. And UK academics are a lot grittier. I
Right.
hate to say, yeah.
And so, on that note, what are your thoughts on, I mean, well, you just gave us your thoughts on Taylor's interview choices. Do you feel selection provided a balanced perspective?
Not
Obviously
really.
not.
He came back to the academy, which is the typical problem, not in just academics, but in fiction, is that they want to focus on Muslim voices that affirm the worldview and the sensibilities of white progressives.
Mm.
So that's why these third spaces get written about when you got 20 middle class Muslims in the suburb, but 100,000 black Muslims in Philly is not worth a book because too black, too working class, too conservative.
Mm. Well, Salafism also, as we talked about, faces a lot of criticism for being rigid and isolationist. But
That's the norm.
I mean, but do you
Yeah.
see any examples of positive ways where Salafism has adapted to the American context?
Well, look, man, as people get older, they had to moderate out of necessity to survive at the workplace. So even if rhetorically, as a collective, Salafis haven't moderated individually, they have.
Mhm.
Because people have had to moderate to succeed in the workforce, to succeed at school. So it's implied that you've had to moderate in order to succeed in these environments. And you can just see it when you see hardcore Salafis that were in niqab 15 years ago, their work outings with the girls, or when they're you know, I know a lot of old hardcore Salafi guys I know are NFL games today, stuff like that. People are moderating individually, but they don't have a language to do so collectively.
Mm. And so, I really didn't have a chance to read scripture people for this podcast, but I did watch an interview with the author, and I recommend people go and watch it. It's actually really interesting. At the end of the interview, he posed a really interesting question, and it's one that I grapple with myself. It's something I've also seen you touch on loosely on one of your blogs. But how does someone, after going through a Salafi phase, or in the case of Matthew D. Taylor, a Christian fundamentalist phase, take the positive structures that it provided? I mean, because for myself, before Islam coming into it, I felt like my life was kind of a mess. I did, go into a like Salafi jihadi phase.
Oh
It
man,
provided a lot of structure that pulled me out of a lot of the other things that I was into.
okay.
But how do you maintain that structure and even pass it on to your children without clinging too rigidly to its dictates?
Well,
What are your thoughts on finding that kind of balance?
I have a different perspective now, and I'll share with you a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago. There was an argument in a class about the miracles of the Prophet Muhammad.
Mm.
And the guy teaching the class was Sufi influenced, and most of the people in the class were Salafi influenced. So he asked me what my opinion is. He said, which one is true? And I said, well, they're both true, and they're both not true. So my perspective is this. Matthew D. Taylor came from a religious fundamentalist upbringing with his family, Christian fundamentalist, evolved out of that to where he is today, which is essentially a progressive academic. So what he's trying to do is take some of the positives from his upbringing and discard what he views as negative. I have kind of a different perspective in that I've tried to discard things as well, but after a period of years of isolation, of years of being isolated from my family, isolated from my community, living in this Muslim silo, this Muslim bubble. I remember one year it was Thanksgiving. I didn't even know it. I couldn't figure out why the restaurants were closed. That so a lot of people in my generation, we came out of this isolation, this bubble, And then when we were ready to moderate and come back to the mainstream, American society had changed so much in terms of politics, in terms of social cohesiveness, in terms of sexuality, gender, uh, etc., that it was a society we recognize is not the one we grew up in.
Mm.
So we were, and I'm still in this position, kind of perplexed. I'm no longer the young fundamentalist, the young militant, but I'm also someone not at ease with where America is politically, socially, culturally. I'm not at ease with where the American family is. I'm not at ease with the health of society. And even though I'm not necessarily a strict fundamentalist believer, I find comfort in what I do understand. And what I do understand is the Muslim context.
Mm.
Now, am I caught up on who killed who 13, 1400 years ago and what sheikh said what and this, that? No, because I've essentially read too much. I essentially view, you know, these are very man-driven discussions. Uh, so what's important is the truth in it that you accept, the truth in it that you find peaceful, the truth in it that gives you comfort. Not necessarily that you're going to argue with somebody over who has the best method or whose sheikh has the biggest kufi, or you're going to get angry with someone over 1,000-year-old theological argument that you can poke holes on both sides.
Mm.
If you look at the religion through that, it's always going to be problematic. But if you look at it as guidelines, as parameters, as foundation, as a system you're living within, which is, I would argue, a healthier system, despite maybe some issues, a healthier system than the normative Western way of living today. I think that's how you do it. Now, Taylor has embraced the academic consensus of social progressivism, of what do you call it? Symbolic capitalism, which Musa Garbi called it. I have not embraced those things.
Mm.
So I still find myself amongst the Ghuraba, amongst the strangers, but not the Ghuraba in the ghetto masjid, the Ghuraba in the sense of that I'm strange, I'm a stranger, Garib in American society, and the only thing that can give me a semblance of understanding is religion, and not just the identity as a Muslim, but I find comfort from rabbis, Jewish rabbis, Christian thought leaders, etc. The Abrahamic faith still, to me, provide the best guidance in these times.
Just moving on to your recent trip to Indonesia.
Yeah.
You recently read Revolusi, which
Yes.
obviously dives into Indonesia's fight for independence. Was your trip to Indonesia influenced by the book, and how did that book challenge or shape your impressions of Indonesian Muslims and their culture?
No, I went to Indonesia. My wife's Indonesian,
Mm.
so going to see her family and just travel. And when I travel anywhere, even if like I'm traveling to California, I'll try to read a book about California. When I went to London, I read books about British history. So I always try to read and watch videos and podcasts in anticipation of the trip. So Revolusi was an interesting book, and I've read other books because Indonesia is actually a miracle country, in my opinion. It's a fascinating country. 17,000 islands. Never a British guy came up with the word Indonesia. Never in history was there ever a place called Indonesia. There was hundreds and thousands of kingdoms existing within what is today Indonesia. Uh, Geographically spread out, hundreds of languages, many different ethnicities. An independence movement rose about. There was no national language. They had to essentially create and promote Bahasa Indonesian. They, centuries of colonialism from the Portuguese, from the British, and the longest being the Dutch. Occupation by the Japanese during World War II. A lot of death and murder and brutality, through this. Systematic rape and pillaging of the land. Hindu and Buddhist and animist history on these islands, and then Islam comes. And it's all kind of mixed together in what the Dutch called the Spice Islands. So the food is spicy with a lot of ingredients, and the people are spicy with a lot of ingredients. And they declare independence, Merdeka, and they have to essentially fight two wars because the Dutch came back and then they had to fight, the Dutch again. But just how this nation has survived, they've lost a couple of islands, East Timor and stuff like that. But how the nation has survived is miraculous. There was a communist attempt in the 60s and 70s to take over Indonesia. That was fought back, very controversially. Western academics not a big fan of Indonesia because they so harshly repulsed the communist takeover. My wife is an example. Like her grandfather, I believe, was murdered by communists. So there was a lot going on, at that time. And how Islam enters the equation, where there's a masjid in every neighborhood when you go there, and there's two big national Muslim organizations, Nahdlatul Ulama, which is very Sufi-oriented organization, and Muhammadiyah, which is not quite Salafi, but they're a little bit Arab influenced, etc. That the population is very devout. A much higher percentage of women wear hijab than wore a generation ago. Critics say there's been an Arabization of Islam in Indonesia. There's this popular consumerist Islam emerging of Islamic products and preachers on social media. So Islam is very vibrant and omnipresent in Indonesia. I went to Pizza Hut and we went to pray, and our waitress was behind us at the musalla in the Pizza Hut. By the way, there's a lot better food than Pizza Hut in Indonesia, but we were taking kids, for pizza, and the food is great. If you don't mind spicy food, it's great food. And
Islam said it was better than Filipino food. When I was talking about Filipino food on Twitter, you would ranked it above.
Yeah,
Indonesian food above. Yeah.
Okay, how can I say this without getting myself in trouble? I'm a fan of the Filipinos, but the food less so.
Really?
It's not as spicy. And they put pork in everything, man.
Yeah, no, and I don't like the way that they cook pork either. When I eat pork.
But Jollibee's, which is like their big fast food chain, like the chicken adobo and fried chicken, and they put the spaghetti with the fried. It's kind of a black thing, right? They put spaghetti with the fried chicken. Like you go to a hood cookout in St. Louis, you'll get some catfish, some fried chicken, and some spaghetti.
Right. Slice of bread.
Yeah.
So,
but so Philippines. I actually want to visit there too. I actually was going to visit the Philippines on this trip, but I got vetoed. So there you have it.
I mean, how does Indonesia? Because I really don't. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about the Muslim population in that part of the world. Not just Indonesians, but Malaysians. My brother, he has a Malaysian business partner. Has tons of Malaysian friends, Indonesians as well. But as you just mentioned, Indonesia has a lot of moving parts. From
a lot of moving parts, a lot of influences.
So how do you balance that Islamic tradition with those moving parts?
The thing about Indonesia is it defies all norms. Like you got very religious women in abayas and hijabs, and they're like at karaoke night singing Beyonce, you know what I'm saying? Or Rihanna, you know what I'm saying? It's like it defies the norms you see of any other places in the Muslim world. It's a place where people openly convert between religions. Someone born Muslim would become a Christian. Megawati, former president, converted to Hinduism from Muslim background. It's a country where ethnic Chinese control a very large portion of the economy. It's just a very fascinating place. Islam is omnipresent and people are religiously traditional without kind of the harsh conservatism you'll see in some other parts of the Muslim world. Like music is everywhere. There's a lot of quote unquote free mixing between genders. People are not as hung up about things, and Pancasila is the guiding ideology of Indonesia. And Pancasila essentially is love of country, unity, monotheism. It doesn't state what religion. And so it's very taboo in Indonesia to speak ill of someone's religion. And you go to Istiqlal, the national mosque, which I was blessed to visit. There's an underground tunnel, and that leads to the National Cathedral where the Pope was a couple of months ago. And so they have a vibrant Catholic minority in Indonesia. And it's really something. And I think it's the opposite. Like people like me and Muslim converts in America are very happy when we go to a Muslim majority country because you get to see the adhan, you get to hear the adhan in the street. And in Indonesia, you hear the adhan everywhere. And there's a masjid literally in every neighborhood. And they have Quran reading. And it's not like the Salafi. When I say the norm is Salafi, here you go, you pray your rakat, boom, sunnah, leave, right? Indonesia, no, brother. They got dhikr after salah, and everybody sits for dhikr. So Sufism is very much the norm there. Like you got to sit for 20 minutes after salah and do the dhikr, which comes out of Yemen, that particular dhikrs that they do. But Christians in Indonesia are extremely happy when they meet Western Christians.
Really?
And I was outside the cathedral and I got to witness this. Because to them, they're a minority and they're a small minority. And they're interacting with people that live in a Christian majority. And it's some of the same kind of feelings we may have. There's a sense they're taking that for granted. So yeah, I mean, Indonesia was a beautiful place to visit. I went to the beaches. I really enjoyed myself. I was in areas where there were hardly any tourists. So I was the tallest person no matter wherever I went. The fattest man. I saw a few overweight women, but not many. It's a thin society. And everyone's just on their motorbikes. And the most dangerous thing about there is the traffic, man. The traffic is just insane.
Yeah, I've seen that in a lot of those Far East Asian or Southeast Asian countries when it comes to driving. It looks flipping many.
It is nuts. I mean, it's a 4-lane road and they're going 18 directions and motorbikes are flying and babies are in the back of the motor. I mean, it's just crazy, man. So my American mind had a hard time grasping some of this, but I just, the old saying, Jesus take the wheel. So I guess I'll say Allah take the wheels. Just, I survived. But yeah, I had a great time. I'll tell you something interesting. I was at the National Mosque, which wasn't the most beautiful. The most beautiful mosque is Masjid Raya Al Jaber in Bandung. And Bandung is where the Non-Aligned Conference was back in the day. So it's an historic city. At Istiqlal, the National Mosque, I went to the library in the mosque, and there was a copy of Ayin Hirsi Ali's book, Infidel, in the library. And there was Romeo and Juliet in the library. So there were very much titles that were, in some cases, anti-Muslim, in some cases, romance novels, things not typically we think in a masjid library. So I tried to discuss it with the library staff, and they just kind of blew me off. I don't know if they spoke English or not, but they didn't.
But I'm not too surprised by that because, as many people know, I have a favorable opinion of Orientalism, or to say the least, I don't fully take the Saidian understanding of it. When I type in YouTube for certain Orientalists I'm interested, I just want to get like the background of them. They might be like older from like the 1800s, early 1900s or whatever. It's usually the content that I find on YouTube about them is usually by an Indonesian or a Malaysian person. Unfortunately, I can't speak the language, but I'm always surprised that it's them who actually look into the backgrounds of these people and upload the content on YouTube versus.
Well, look, man, they have their own scholars, their own celebrity imams, their own Islamic ecosystem, their own academics that we are not privy to because there's a linguistic barrier, you know. But politically, Indonesians are also very interested in that political Islam is very minor there. It's there, but outside of the province of Aceh, it's really not a factor. And people are voting really between secular political parties and candidates. You know, they have Prabowo, a new president after Jokowi. People there are also very happy. There's a statue of Barack Obama outside of his elementary school, which I visited. So you don't see that strength of political Islam there like you see in some other Muslim countries, including very religious people voting for secular candidates, which is I think is an interesting thing. Definitely in the Middle East, typically that would not be the case. Oh, also, we'll say another thing is that I asked many people, "What do you think about the American election?" They could care less. They could care less. They just all reminded me that Obama went to school in Indonesia, and they like Barack Obama. And even somebody was wearing a baseball cap that said Obama on it, which I thought was pretty cool. And outside of Obama's elementary school, there was a restaurant, crazy Obama fried rice. And I ate there.
Crazy Obama.
Crazy Obama fried rice. And I did see quite a few Palestinian flags throughout Indonesia. So obviously that's something that's throughout the Muslim world, you would see that. And I was asked about it as well.
Just to shift gears a little slightly, to address some pressing issues that have been making waves in the Muslim community. So recently a teacher from Al Maghrib Institute was caught up in a deeply disturbing child abuse scandal, one that has really cast a shadow over the Institute's reputation now. Yes. Unfortunately, this isn't obviously an isolated case. We've seen troubling patterns of cases coming to light involving the abuse of women and children by figures of authority or individuals entrusted to lead the community. With these scandals now surfacing more frequently, how do you think the Muslim community in the States and elsewhere can address these systemic issues and hold leadership accountable and rebuild trust?
I think rebuilding trust is key because if you look at the Catholic Church, I grew up in a very Catholic city, in a very Catholic community. And now the St. Louis Archdiocese has a program called All Things New, which is basically a managed decline of the St. Louis Archdiocese because so many churches are closing. And one of the main drivers for that is all the sex scandals. And if Muslims don't develop programs like the Catholic Church has been forced to, they now have programs which are very strict on how to deal with kids because they've been forced, by lawsuits into this box. That's where the Muslim community is headed because it's not just one scandal. We've seen repeated scandal, and the pattern every time is a cover-up. It's to protect the honor of the community, protect the honor of the brother, protect the publicity, protect the fundraising. It's to do all those things and to not worry about the victim, and in many times shame the victim and blame the victim. And many times because of shame culture, the families are conspiring to keep the victim silent and to make sure the perpetrator isn't incarcerated because it would bring publicity to the family. I think we have to ask ourselves, is this type of behavior the norm in Pakistani madrasa culture? Some people are applying that this is, and that's why some don't see it as big of a deal. It's one of those nasty things that's happened, but it's part of growing up. Possibly in Pakistan, but definitely illegal in the United States. And so we have to pursue it to the furthest extent of the law. Masjids have to develop systems of checks and balances that have the protection of children in mind. The philandering imams, or womanizing imams, are not as problematic to me because, um, quite frankly, a lot of women are attracted to power and leadership and have, thrown themselves at these imams. So they agree to the secret marriage, agree to be the side piece or the second marriage. And then if she doesn't get promoted to one, then she might make it a big deal, which is a traditional story, right? A guy cheats on his wife. Uh, yeah, baby, I'm gonna get a divorce, and you're gonna be my, and then it blows up, right? So that's not as problematic to me as, even though I don't like the abuse of religious position of authority to womanize. If you're gonna womanize, just womanize, right? You don't have to be an imam to gain vaginal access. I mean, we're in America. It's the market is flooded, right? So, but the kids is something which I find to be horrific and could ruin any credibility the Muslim community has. And when these kids get of age, they're going to start making their own TikTok videos. They're going to start making their own YouTube videos. They're going to start writing their own memoirs, and they're probably not going to have anything to do with the Muslim community that ignored their abuse and ignored their humanity because they're worried about hitting fundraising goals and public relations. So this is a very big problem. We've seen some kind of conservative actors defend Wissam Sharif, or say, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, let's let this play out. I am not, because the court of public opinion is free. If you read the charges, it's all on video. His wife turned him in. I think he's repugnant, and I'm glad he's being prosecuted in the great state of Alabama, where he will not have a woke judge. He'll probably be in prison for the rest of his life or a very long time. And that's where he needs to be. I have no sympathy for him, and I believe there should be no mercy for him.
What are your thoughts? Oh, go ahead. It looks like you had a question. Go ahead.
No, it's just in terms of the Islamic school environment in which it took
Yeah.
place, which
Yeah.
obviously gives someone ample opportunity to
There's no professionalism. Look, I went to go see my daughter. I dropped her off at school. This is years ago at the Muslim school. And I went back to go pick her up, and her and the kids were playing next to the freeway, right? I saw them even before I get there. I'm driving down, the freeway, and I see children playing. And I said, oh, that's odd. And I'm like, whoa, that's mine. So, I mean, there's no supervision. You walk in there, there's no organization. It's literally an ideal atmosphere for for a bad actor. And I was involved in the masjid years ago, where you had the security guy. He was an Afghan guy, and he was messing with the little boys. And the masjid worked to cover it up. The families worked to cover it up. Everyone worked to cover it up to make sure he didn't get prosecuted because they didn't want the bad publicity. He left.
The safeguarding issues of children. Would you advise any of your Muslim friends to send their children to Islamic schools at the moment?
No, I would not. No, I would not. You can teach your kids. You can teach your kids Quran. If you cannot, you can hire a teacher, a tutor to come over. If not, they have some very good online resources. I would not. And just in terms of the full-time school, the academics aren't that good. So your kid might be a little more religious, but they'll be stupid. So, I mean, it's a trade-off.
And that leads to another question. Like, what are these Islamic centers, even these college institutions? Like, who are they producing? I mean, yes, they have these celebrity imam, sheikhs, whoever running them, with a cult following that tends to go there and follow these people hand and foot. But scholarship wise, and even just productive people to go out into society and benefit society that way. I mean, who do you see them producing any kind of like what are the fruits of what they've been doing all these years? Have you seen any?
Well, Islamic scholarship in America, to really learn about Islam, is largely non-Muslims in academia. as crazy as academia is, and we have a lot of nutty professors out there, there is a lot of learning out there. And these institutes are simply a mechanism for some celebrity imams to make a lot of money. They're motivational speakers. Um, they give pep talks. They're on kind of a Joel Osteen vibe, non-judgmental, cash to checks. They're not really teachers. You're not really learning anything.
Mm.
That's at the institute level. Then when you go down to the Muslim school level, I'll just give you an example. A few years ago, I was looking for a job in Dallas, and a friend of mine is working for a Muslim school. He said, "Hey, come apply here." And they said, "What can you teach?" I said, "I can teach history." And they said, "Well, we really need a math teacher. Can you teach math?" I'm like, "No, I'm not really good at math." And they're saying, "Well, you can teach it anyway. Just go by the book." So that's kind of the level of education going on. So there's no real learning. People are learning Islam. These institutes with these events are social events. These conferences are social events. They're not learning seminars and learning events, because when you're in the real environment of learning, some things are going to make you uncomfortable. Some things are going to make you question your beliefs. If that doesn't happen in an environment, there's no real learning going on. If you're just getting reinforced, that's just pep talk.
Definitely. And when these abuse scandals come to light, there's often a lack of widespread accountability within the community. What steps do you think institutions and leaders should take to create safer, more transparent environments?
The reality is like probably 80, 90% of the masses in America are very small. They may not have any paid employees. Um, some of them are just, people trying their hardest to have a place to pray in the community. Um, they don't have the resources to enact anything if they even have the desire, and many of them don't have the desire. So you're really talking about a segment of maybe 10% of the masajid in America that are these suburban Islamic centers with a lot of paid staff. So they can be the role models and leaders in this, and they should enact the same regulations that Christian schools have, that public schools have. All the steps that have been taken, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go through the programs for childhood protections that are being enacted in public schools and in Catholic schools in the United States, and they can do that because they have the resources, and then they can be the role model that the rest of the community can emulate.
In terms of Muslim political engagement in the States,
Yeah.
how do you envision the future of Muslim electoral politics coming out of this latest election? With the challenges now that's facing both parties, what opportunities do you see for the Muslim community to really advocate for itself effectively?
I think that nationally, Muslims are not really a political factor. Where Muslims can be effective and are effective is locally, where there are large Muslim populations, like Somalis in Minnesota, Arabs in Michigan, Iranians in Southern California, Bosnians in St. Louis, Kurds in Nashville, and various Muslim groups such as Bengalis in New York City. You know, so where Muslims can cluster, you can have a voice locally. So I think that Muslim political power is going to continue to increase on the local level as more and more Muslims are registered to vote and become politically active. And you've seen Muslims win elections locally in almost all those places I just mentioned. The challenge is nationally, where the Muslim community is just so small, it's very difficult to impact national politics. But we also have to understand that the Muslim community is so broad and diverse. I think it's really hard to see a cohesive political message from a community this broad. Do Somali taxi drivers in Minneapolis have the same needs as South Asian millionaires in the suburbs of Dallas? Do do Muslim tech bros in the Silicon Valley of California have the same worldview as working class immigrant Muslim communities in Queens and Brooklyn have. The community is just so broad and diverse that people have different needs. But I will say one thing is a gender divide. I think we're going to see this in national politics, a gender divide. I think on national politics, you're going to see Muslim women, particularly college-educated Muslim women, and the Muslim community is a very educated community as a whole, gravitate towards the Democratic Party because educated women are gravitating towards the Democratic Party, not because of traditional FDR economics, which is my foundation in the Democratic Party, but because of the social issues and the cultural issues and liberalism. And you're going to see increasingly Muslim men reject that as other men are rejecting that. And there's a big gender divide opening up in American politics. And you see it in the Muslim manosphere online. So that's the divide we're going to see coming up. I don't think Muslims will be in a position to have a great impact on national politics, though.
So you don't think the Kamala's position on Gaza was a deciding factor for her, as what some Muslim commentators are saying?
No, Muslim commentators are being very narcissistic. She was just a bad candidate for many, many reasons. Not a good candidate. And, take Muslims, if you remove the entirety of the Muslim vote, Trump still would have won. Just Muslims were not a factor. In Trump, did well broadly with many populations. He got nearly half of the Hispanic vote, whereas when he first ran, he only got like 10 or 15%. He got a quarter of black men. He got increasing numbers of white working class voters, increasing numbers of Asian. He just rose across the board.
Right.
And part of that is Kamala's a bad candidate. And part of that is the message of Trump resonated with a lot more people this time around for a variety of factors.
Do you think?
But I don't think Gaza, I don't see how Gaza can be a big issue with Trump. Was he running on a platform of support for Palestinians? Or no? So
his far right supporters were using that as a talking point. They were, strangely enough, they were more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. I think because a lot of Muslims, for some odd reason, online engage with those kind of figures. They were mistaking the trees for the forest.
Right. Marco Rubio is going to be a Secretary of State. So, and I like Marco. Identify Marco, Miami guy, Cuban, Miami, dope dealers in his family. When he was a kid, uncle went to prison, was a big time dope dealer, married a Colombian woman who was a Miami Dolphins cheerleader. So I kind of like the whole Marco Rubio story. I think he has a good story. I like his story better than I like J.D. Vance's story. But I don't think Muslims had a real impact, a real factor in this election.
Do you foresee them ever having a real impact on any future election? Do you think
nationally? No, not nationally. Unless things come down to one state, and like the election is so close, and it just comes down to 100,000 votes in one state. No, but I think Muslims can have and do have major impact in local elections and in state elections. But particularly in local elections, where you have Muslims elected the mayor of Hamtramck and the mayor of Dearborn, and northern New Jersey, places with a lot of Muslims can and do. We've had several Muslims elected to office here in St. Louis alone. But the key to Muslims is Muslims have this grandiose, I'm going to start politics with the presidential election. That's not how politics works. You start politics at the local level, and then you build up. So you'll talk to a lot of these Muslims that are totally enthralled by the presidential election, who don't even know who their mayor is. They don't even know who their city councilman is. They don't know who their state rep is, state senator, their school board members. That's where politics starts. And if you don't have a stake in all that, people don't take you seriously at all if you just come to them talking about national politics and say, where have you been?
Right.
So politics is from the local up.
And I was thinking in terms of what you just said about the politics, starting at local and trickling up. In What did you think of the candidacy of Butch Ware, in terms of his relationship with Jill Stein, and now he's saying he's going to run for president next time, and
Yeah.
he's somebody who's never really been involved in any form of local politics, shooting for that office straight up seems a bit.
Yeah, online gambling is now illegal in the state of Missouri. So I will put a hefty wager on Butch Ware not being the next president of the United States. I'm pretty confident of that, the vote, or governor of California, whoever is running for. Look, I am not what Musa Garvey calls a symbolic capitalist, which means the new liberal culture elite progressivism. So I have zero attraction to the Green Party. I just see them as a bunch of academic weirdos and rich white kids with green hair who are trying to piss off their parents. I don't take the Green Party seriously. I take people seriously that can win elections.
Right.
If we know from the beginning that you have zero chance of winning the election, these are just vanity candidacies, or it's a candidacy to make money and to sell books and to raise your profile. One thing we know is that Jill Stein was not going to be president of the United States. For one thing, she ran in 2020 and didn't do anything in 4 years. She just shows up every 4 years and runs for president.
Right.
Well, a lot's went on in the last 4 years, Jill. And she began running this year. She came to St. Louis. I believe she got arrested here. I don't take these candidates seriously. And I think the Muslim community is a small community. It's already marginal. I don't think it benefits anyone to get involved with these marginal candidates. Keep in mind, Butch Ware wasn't the only Muslim VP candidate. Cornel West had, I believe her name was Melina Abdullah, who was his running mate. So we had two Muslims in the hunt for the vice presidency. And unfortunately, it went to Mr. J.D. Vance, who has an interesting religious story too, because he grew up in a typical white dysfunctional family. And he was kind of evangelical-ish, converted to Catholicism as an adult, and is married to a Hindu. So he has an interesting religious story with him and his wife, Usha Vance, as well.
And as you know, with Trump's victory and his followers or his supporters just running victory laps all on social media.
The YMCA dance.
Social media everywhere. And, we're starting to see a migration of users from the platform X, and for obvious reasons, to Blue Sky. This platform that I've heard a lot about. I'm thinking about making the migration myself, not leaving X, but just to see what it's about, considering a few people I know have gone over there. But how do you see this shift shaping online communities, especially in terms of fostering meaningful dialogue and inclusivity? Do you think Blue Sky offers a better space for engagement, or does it?
Blue Sky is an echo chamber. I opened an account just to remove the Umar Lee name. And I scrolled through, I saw a bunch of long COVID. Everyone over there seems to have long COVID for some reason, and a lot of talk about masks and COVID and long COVID. And I persist and I rise. I mean, if you read those accounts, you would think that they're in Aleppo right now and like unsure of their future, and death may be at their door tomorrow. They're not living a wealthy life in the suburbs of San Francisco or Kansas City or wherever they may be.
Just to add on that right there, my colleague has, I live in the UK. I work with the British guy. He has a friend who's from California. A couple, when they were thinking about moving back to California, but since Trump won, they don't want to go back because they don't feel America's a safe place. And I'm like, you're from Southern California. California was already in a bad state before Trump. I don't, and you're right. I just the exaggeration.
The people who America is dangerous for are the people it's always been dangerous for, and that's people in the hood, in poverty, not these wealthy white progressives who can sashay from California to the UK to Paris, and America's not dangerous for them. They can cut the theatrics. This is just performative on their behalf. Which gets into the "We Were Never Woke," which you got to read. Musa Garvey, he talks about all this performance from the from the woke left. Blue sky, no, garbage. If one word to describe it, it's an echo chamber. It's a bunch of lunatics. And X is mean. It's nasty, but it's still, you have a wide swath of opinion and writers and researchers and academics. And I could follow Muslim discourse, American political discourse. I can follow boxing, wrestling, MMA, St. Louis events, baseball, all that. If I go to Blue Sky, I strictly get the opinions of the college educated urban liberal who essentially have the same opinions on every issue. And in addition to the things I mentioned earlier, a lot of weird art I saw in there, a lot of cats and a lot of dogs. And you know how X, they throw thirst traps at you. It's like TikTok. You watch your history videos, you watch your trivia, you watch your UG on the streets of Vienna, these nice little man on the street interviews, and then all this informative content and 80s nostalgia, and then they throw you the thirst trap. Boom! The big booty Latina, right for you. We know you're not smart. We know you're not the bookish guy you purport to be. We know you're just a dirty, nasty St. Louis guy, right? And Twitter does that too. The algorithm knows what you want to see, right? You know what I'm saying? So I went to Blue Sky and they were throwing me thirst traps too, but it wasn't what I was thirsty for. They're throwing me dudes, you know what I'm saying? So I said, yo, bro, you know what I'm saying? Ain't no Diddy action over here. So it's just it's a whole different vibe over there, and it ain't my vibe. But
I do feel like X is in an echo chamber. I will give that to X. It's not an echo chamber, and I feel like it's gladiator sports when you go on X and you're expressing your opinion. You will get unwarranted pushback. I mean, go on Jonathan Brown's Twitter, and it's him constantly having to argue with people. And
I was the first Jonathan Brown hater, by the way. Now it's a big club. Now a lot of people hate Jonathan Brown, but I was the first. You know what I'm saying? So.
And that actually leads to our next question or topic. And as you know, we interviewed Dr. Morrow a couple episodes ago, and I was actually surprised to find your incident with Jonathan Brown at a lecture he gave on the topic of.
He actually emailed me a few times, contacted me, was writing the book, and wanted some more feedback from me. And I just was busy, and I wasn't quite sure who he was, didn't know what I was getting involved with. So, but I did skim through the book.
Yeah, I was surprised that a lot of people really weren't familiar with Dr. Morrow's work or scholarship. I mean, a lot of people are in the apologetic scene because of the Christian treaties that Muhammad had with the Christians of the world. A lot of people in apologetics know about that, but a lot of people were unfamiliar when I talked to him. So you're saying Dr. Morrow did try to reach out to get your views. So what are your thoughts on slavery in Islamic history? And you said you had a chance to explore Dr. Morrow's work. How do you feel about his approach to such a controversial and sensitive topic?
I think he said some things that are very important. He talks about how Christian denominations and the Catholic Church and even institutions like St. Louis University here in St. Louis, which is a Jesuit university, have issued group apologies for slavery. Now, is that just performative liberalism, or is that coupled with action? That's the big question. But at least they've admitted to a past wrongdoing, and that with Muslims, there is no such admission. There is no such self-examination. There is simply apologetics. It's, that Muslim slavery was different. To get raped by a Muslim slave master was great. To be a child soldier in a Muslim army was fantastic. To get kidnapped from your mother, as long as the kidnappers were Muslims, fantastic. You turn it around, evil. So there's never been critical examination by Muslims of Muslim slavery. There has never been an abolition movement, never arose out of the Muslim world. Even the examples he pointed to were not real examples. Like Nathaniel Matthews said, in Senegal. Well, Senegalese were opposed to themselves being slavery, but we know from like returned slaves from America that were Muslim, they went home to West Africa and re-engaged in taking slaves and owning slaves. So slavery very much traveled with Islam. Slavery was very much a cultural norm in Muslim societies, Sunni and Shia. This was the reality, and abolition movements did not arise. So what do we do with this historical problem? We can either address it and say that we have evolved as humans, we have progressed. Slavery, you can make some kind of historical apologetics. It was needed in its early agriculture eras, et cetera, and say that we have evolved beyond this. But we would never condone it today. It should never happen today. Or you can do like Jonathan Brown and say, because slavery, the Prophet owned slaves, and slavery was in the prophetic time period, and slavery is a part of Islamic history, and the Khulafa owned slaves, and the Sahaba owned slaves, and the Prophet owned slaves, that we therefore are forced to defend slavery, concubinage, to say consent is fetishized and not necessary for ethical sex. We are forced to do all these things because it was a part of Islamic history from the beginning. That's the position Jonathan Brown is taking. If you take that position, then you're admitting that there is no legislation or Islamic ruling that would necessitate that slavery be illegal today. So what you're saying is, under the ideal conditions, slavery and concubinage should reemerge today. So a normal feature of war today should be the taking of sex slaves and the taking of other slaves, and all the things that were done throughout Islamic history. This should return as we decolonize the Muslim world, or post-colonial in the Muslim world, because the loss of slavery in the Islamic world is very much a product of colonialism, of colonial influence. So in order to decolonize and get back to an Islamic ethos, we must return slavery. If you admit, as Jonathan Brown will, that there's nothing that would make it Islamically impermissible or unethical. That's the position of Brown and his apologists. That's the position of ISIS. That's the position of others. If you take that position, I think what Morrow is trying to say, and the better way of looking at things, is to say that we have evolved as humanity. We can contextualize why slavery was in certain areas in the prophetic era amongst the Sahaba, so that we can contextualize that, but live by our modern norms, which sees these things as reprehensible in the current context. And American Islam is founded by Black Americans who accepted Islam as a religion of liberation from slavery, as liberation from Jim Crow and segregation and police brutality, etc. And so Elijah created a myth that Islam is pro-Black, which Islam has never been pro-Black. Malcolm furthered the myth and popularized the myth that Islam is pro-Black, which was a myth. Islam was not pro-Black. The Saudi Arabia he made Hajj into was not pro-Black. It was not kumbaya, all colors get together as one. Tribalism has always existed among Muslims. Racism has always existed among Muslims, because Muslims are human, and these are things that exist within humanity. So there's no religion that's immune from prejudice and racism and ethno-nationalism, etc. If that were the case, you wouldn't see all these ethnic murderous conflicts in Muslim societies throughout history. So the myth of Malcolm and the myth of Elijah created Islam as a pro-Black religion that was anti-oppression, anti the white man, anti-slavery, anti-racism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when Islam had never been any of those things. But it created something better, in my opinion. So the idea that Malcolm created, and the idea within the ethos of the Black American Muslim, within the ethos of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad and others, is a improvement. This was a good innovation, that we're taking a religion that was responsible for our slavery, because the Muslim slave traders traded to the Europeans, and the Europeans trafficked African bodies. We're taking this religion that was oppressive, and we're going to make it a religion of liberation. And so they set the foundation of Islam in the United States, that when other groups came, they saw Islam as a force of liberation, a force of justice, etc. And that's a better way of looking at it than returning to some roots and saying this is where morality was set in stone and slavery was part and parcel of that. We can believe, we can choose to believe in the positive myths and discard those that are not beneficial for our existence in modern society. What benefit is it to talk about marital rape, to say that marital rape is not haram? What benefit is it to give a lecture on this, to write a discourse on this, when it is illegal under the law in the United States, and I think probably nearly every Western country? What benefit is that to tell Muslim men that this information? It's of no benefit. What benefit is it to talk about age of consent, and consent is not necessary for ethical sexual relations? What benefit is that? I think people that engage, including Daniel Haqiqi, that repeatedly engage in discussion on these topics, I would be very interested in their search history. I'll just put it at that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I definitely am very suspect of any man who trivializes the age of consent, the way that we see it being done across social media platform by famous speakers.
Just
Yeah.
just directly related to what you just said about Malcolm X, etc. You wrote in one of your recent blog posts that there is no universalism in Islam. That's a fantasy.
Yes.
Could you explain what you meant by that, and what experiences led you to that conclusion, and how does that shape your broader view of Islam?
There's this myth, particularly among American Muslims and converts, that there's this pure, pristine Islam, there's this pure, pristine Muslim community, and that people's culture interferes. They put culture into Islam, and they'll say, that's not Islam, that's culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, guess what? It's always been culture. You've never been able to free culture in Islam. And 9 times out of 10, culture is going to outweigh religion.
It's always going to be an interpretive lens.
It's always going to be interpreted through culture, through your cultural context, and the context of where you are. So this myth that Muslims are one, there's no difference, we're just dividing ourselves over culture, is a myth, because you cannot separate culture from your religious understanding. Even the whole idea of saying that is an indication of your cultural context. The Muslim community is, like every other community, dependent on your socioeconomic class, on your ethnicity, on your race, where you're living, what time period you're in. All these things have a huge impact. And so to erase all that and say we're just universal, we're the same, we have the same experience, we have the same worldview, and it's only our cultures that are dividing us, misses the forest for the trees. We understand religion via our cultural context. So I cannot be a Saudi, I cannot be a Turk, I cannot be a Malay. I certainly have no animosity towards them. I certainly can have friendship and learning from them, but we're all understanding Islam through our cultural context. Our cultural context. Now, another thing when this comes in, we are all one ummah, is to, for example, they tell people in Saudi Arabia, you shouldn't go to a boxing match. The Saudis are taking over boxing. They're saying you can't go to a boxing match, or you can't go to a J-Lo concert because of the Palestinians are suffering, right? So they're not supposed to be able to enjoy themselves because Palestinians are suffering. Or you tell a Bengali and a Pakistani that you should have complete unity when they have totally separate understandings of history, and they have, you know, and with Bangladesh, they have very much a cultural influence, from further south in Asia. So everyone is coming at it through their own cultural context and has their own need. I give you an example. I may mention this before. Is last Eid, we had at City Hall, Eid al-Fitr, and it was organized by African American Muslims, and a local Palestinian woman worked to boycott it. Said we cannot meet with city officials because of Gaza. Now keep in mind, the St. Louis Board of Aldermen passed a resolution calling for a ceasefire, and that no one in the city of St. Louis has any authority whatsoever on foreign policy matters. Mm. And I attended, and there were very few non-Black Muslims who attended. And Charles Abdul Wali Muhammad, who's a local journalist and Muslim member of the Nation of Islam, he sat next to me. He told me, he said, if we had to cancel an event because of suffering, Black folks would never have an event. Hmm. So he took that as an affront to the Black community. So I'm saying is you can't put one experience and universalize it. Everyone is living a different experience depending on where they are.
In Islamic history itself, and I heard this from a historian, and it really opened my eyes to something. Islamic history isn't linear to where all the dots connect. If you look at, the West, there is no linear history from Islam started in Saudi or in Arabia, then migrated to Persia, then went there to where we can kind of follow and string all of these things together. Really, so yeah, that's
it's like Mo, my friend Muhammad, the Persian poetry guy. That's what he talks about, because the Iranians who are anti-Islam and promoting Zoroastrianism and everything else, saying that the Arabs corrupted Persian culture. What he points is that no, it's the Persians guided Islam. You know what I'm saying? Like they weren't just recipients. They were caretakers and shepherds of this experience.
I mean, there's a really that is a really interesting argument. I seen Daniel Hakikaju making a similar one, and there is a little bit of credence to that when you look at all of the Persian scholarship, from the Hadith literature to the Arabic language to most of the inventions that Muslims take pride in, that we like to throw in the face of Westerners to show how great we were. A lot of them have Persian, Iranian so-called roots. It is an interesting argument. I will say that. I don't tend to dabble in those kinds because they can turn very racial and ethnic.
Big time.
After a while, and there's some heated discussions when it comes between Turks, Persians, and Arabs on these things. I don't want to say that they're the foundational cultures of Islam, but they definitely the ones that played a major part in its early development.
Just remember, Adam and Eve did in fact speak Turkish.
Or that there are the Prophet Muhammad predicted the rise of a Turkish nation, and that we all learn Turkish so we can partake.
I heard that.
And then you find similar hadiths. The most spoken language in hell is Persian. So they have those, and it's very interesting how these things play out. But just to get back to where we at. Lastly, Umar. Well, no, actually, I want to talk about Saudi and the boxing culture that's starting to develop out there. I actually work. A gentleman lives in the flats I work in. He claims to work for Turkey Al Sheikh. I'm not sure how true it is.
Well, slide him my number, man, because I'm trying to get to Saudi.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about this?
I love it. I love it.
Saudi gets a lot of backlash for a lot of the entertainment that's coming.
Let me tell you something. All these puritanical Muslims, I want to see their second Instagram account, not their Muslim Instagram account. I want to see them when they're the one where they found all the OnlyFans girls. That's the one I want to see. So, look, man, what MBS has said, and Turkey Al Sheikh has been empowered to do, is say, look, we want a normal, moderately religious society. We have the Kaaba, we have Medina. We're going to facilitate Hajj and Umrah. We are paying for the upkeep of many thousands of masajid throughout the country. We are not prohibiting anybody from practicing Islam, learning Islam, from being as pious and devout as they want to be. But that we're not going to lose our talented young people via brain drain because they don't have the entertainment options that they like. They feel we're not going to let them feel restrictive, that they can't live their full life. And so essentially what they want to be is a wealthier and better ran version of Egypt, where you're free to be as religious as you want to be, as long as you don't challenge the authority of the state. And you're free to be as secular as be with, some limitations to that. And entertainment is a big part of that. Is you're not going to send young people away to college. And the Saudis used to only send married men as graduate students. Now they send undergrads, men and women. You're not going to send these girls to college in the U.S. and then tell them they got to go home and sit in the closet.
Right.
They want to enjoy the same things that they enjoyed in the United States, and they don't want forced religion, compulsory religion. If you want to go to the mosque and pray, that's fine. If you don't, that's between you and Allah. So as a boxing fan, as someone who loves the sport of boxing, His Excellency, as we call him, Turki al-Sheikh, has really been a blessing for the sport of boxing because Saudi money has made a lot of fights happen that wouldn't have otherwise happened. Because he's been able to get the promoters together. The rumor is he's going to purchase a lot of these promotions and create one boxing league like the UFC, which would be Saudi-led and ran. So he's been a blessing to boxing fans in that his money has made the big fights. Now, boxing fans will argue, yeah, we want him in America or in the UK, not in Riyadh. Well, he's writing the checks, right? So he's been a blessing for the sport of boxing. I mean, we got the rematch, Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk coming up. He had Terence Crawford. He did an event in LA. He did an event in Manchester, England, London. The Artur Beterbiev, Dimitri Bivol fight, that was his money. So his money is making things happen. So as myself, have a background in boxing and as a boxing journalist and writer. My friend Dougie Fisher is the editor of Ring Magazine. The Saudis recently purchased Ring Magazine. So I'm trying to get back in to the boxing thing, saying, hey, look, Dougie, if you have any apprehension, I have a lot of experience working with Saudis and dealing with Saudis. Perhaps, I could be a benefit. So I'm trying to get back in the boxing space and write about boxing in Saudi Arabia because I'm really intrigued. Like I want to go to Umrah next year. I want to time my Umrah so I can do Umrah and boxing on the tour. See a fight, and hopefully I don't get no fight making tawaf, and just just the whole experience together. So
what a travel package that would be.
Huh?
I said, what a travel package that would be.
It'd be a travel package, yeah.
Together.
Yeah. So I'm actually trying to find a line of connection to Turki al-Sheikh because I really want to pitch my resume to him, my CV, as they would say in the UK, and do business as far as communications and journalism with regards to boxing in Saudi Arabia. And I think it's a good thing, man. I mean, my newsletter today, I wrote about Muslim combat sports athletes, that Muslim males did not have a lot of positive role models, particularly after 9/11, where Muslims were trying to not be seen as threatening. You don't have a lot of positive depiction of Muslims in literature and television and film. You either got a terrorist or he's drinking wine or he's gay or something like that, right? You don't have like a lot of traditional guys that could be in movies, right? And so people watch these Muslim combat sport athletes and to a lesser extent football players and other sports. And this is something, Muslims can get excited about, particularly young Muslim men. So I think it's a great thing. And keep in mind,
Khabib was such a hit. I remember when I first converted, and I was doing jujitsu at that time, and I was actually surprised by how many Muslims had like an apprehension to combat sports.
Yeah,
It's particularly in the States. You don't see that in the UK. Muslims here have always liked boxing and combat sports, but particularly in the US, they've always, and it seems like they were slow to it. It seems
slow
like
to it.
Really took Khabib.
Traditionally, a lot of Black American Muslims were into boxing. And then our suburban brothers and sisters were kind of like a really wimpy community, man. Just like, not into anything physical. Just like gamers and a very docile looking bunch, I would say. But the other thing is, you got to keep in mind Saudi Arabia, and people criticize Saudi Arabia, and there's a lot of hate for Saudi Arabia. They just opened a new driverless metro system in Riyadh today. But we have to remember, what was the biggest export of Saudi Arabia a generation ago? It wasn't, I mean, besides oil, obviously, it wasn't boxing, it wasn't MMA, it wasn't videos of Cristiano Ronaldo playing soccer, it wasn't J-Lo concerts, it was fighters and financiers for terrorist organizations that destabilize countries, right? So the Saudi government and MBS has taken on these extremists, has neutered them, has basically cut the legs out from under them. And eventually, I think it's going to filter to the United States and to the Islamic University of Medina. And they're saying, look, we're a Muslim country. You can be as religious as you want to be. You can study religion, but we will not tolerate extremism. We will not tolerate Salafi jihadism. We will not tolerate takfirism, and we will not tolerate Ikhwan Muslimin, which he has deemed, and I think rightly so, to be a negative force both in Saudi Arabia and in the region. So I'd rather have a professional boxing match than an ISIS beheading match. That's just my personal take on it. So.
All right, and as we close this interview, we just have a couple more questions. Lastly, Umar, I just wanted to circle back to something you wrote in one of your recent blogs. You said, and we already asked that question, so we're going to go to this one. If there's one message or idea you hope the Muslim community in America takes away from all these discussions, or just to reflect on in general, what would it be?
Just be normal. Take the blessing of living in America, a blessing that many don't have because they're living in difficult circumstances. Enjoy these blessings. Practice your religion with moderation. I'm talking to you right now, and on the football on the television is the NFL, Philadelphia Eagles against the Baltimore Ravens. And I think just to be an American, and Sunday, Thanksgiving with your family, NFL football, and then Saturday college football, and then Sunday the NFL, and then Saturday night you can have your boxing matches. Which one favors of your Lord would you deny?
Right.
You have this blessing. And don't forget, we got Premier League on Peacock. Why would you deny these blessings and then take up your time arguing about the age of consent and whether it's okay to rape your wife and slavery? Let's live in the real world and enjoy the blessings of what we have.
All right. And on that note, Umar Lee,
I got to say one thing before we go.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just, Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, members of the parliament. I hope I said nothing to offend you, because I don't want to be incarcerated. I know that British subjects don't have freedom of speech, so you cannot say what you want and post what you want or have signings that you want. So I hope I didn't offend any of you. Yes.
All right. And on that note, I think this is actually starting to be something like a tradition. After every trip you go on, we bring you on for a podcast.
Yeah, let's do it. I got some big trips planned next year, inshallah. So.
Yeah. You said you were trying to go to Umrah next year.
I'm trying to do 2 trips, a Umrah/boxing tour. Now, a lot of this contingent on the boxing part, because I really am trying to get some business going on, so that could really fall at any time. That's number one. And the second thing is either Africa or Latin America will be the second trip.
Interesting. What part of Africa?
Really, wherever I can get the cheap airline deals and cheap accommodations, and I can put something together I think is affordable and doable. It really will come down to that. Being in St. Louis is a handicap. Like, you're from the Bay Area, you can fly directly to the Philippines and so many places from San Francisco Airport. St. Louis, we're really limited in terms of where we can fly direct. So you got to go to Chicago and then who's flying out of Chicago. So logistically, it's kind of a challenge from St. Louis, but I find a way to make it happen.
All right, well, your journey as a writer and activist gives us a raw, has definitely given me a raw and honest look at the intersections of faith, culture, and society. Your work doesn't just document the Muslim experience in America, it challenges it, it critiques it, and forces us to think deeper. Whether you're reflecting on Salafism, cultural shifts, or critiquing the Muslim community, you always push to confront the tough questions. And I think that's why a lot of people really dig what you're saying across the board. I mean, every time I interview you, I'm surprised by the people who reach out and say, "Hey, I really dig that interview." Which the last interview was a lot of academics, surprisingly enough, even though you kind of go hard on them.
Yeah,
A lot of them reached out and said that they really enjoyed the interview we had last time. And, we hope to bring you on for many more. You're definitely a friend of the channel.
appreciate it.
I really dig your insights. Sometimes you exaggerate, say that I'm your hero, but really it's the
Yeah.
reverse.
Uh,
Coming from your background, you definitely inspired
you're
me.
living a dream life for me. I always wanted to live in the UK, and you actually did it.
I mean, I don't know, man, but you know what you do with your blog and how you've been able to make a name for yourself coming from humble beginnings, man. It's very admirable and definitely gave me a lot of motivation for what I do on this channel. Because, like
Well,
what
I see us as fellow travelers, in the sense, I was kicked out of high school. I ended up getting my GED from Job Corps. You know about Job Corps, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And Job Corps is like this federal program for inner city job training and education. And I don't have a lot of formal schooling. I'm
yeah.
self-taught. And I kind of see us as fellow travelers in the sense that we're talking to academics and we're talking about books and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we're working class
Yeah,
jobs
working class jobs. And
to
like
pay the
yourself,
bills.
man, I got kicked out of my high school senior year. I had to go to continuation school and
Yeah.
really didn't get interested in these kind of things until later on in life. And so yeah, that's why I have so much admiration for you because again, I feel like you come from the same situation as myself where, you've been able to make a name for yourself dealing with these people who, from looking on the outside would seem to be many grades above you, but you're in there chunking them with them, keeping up. So
I see us as fellow travelers.
all
I
right,
see us.
cool, man. Likewise, and man, I might have to join you on that Umrah trip
Hey man,
if you let
and
me
go
know
see the
ahead of
box.
time.
Don't forget the box. Don't forget Turkey, man.
I'm
But
not,
His Excellency. Yeah.
he and that's another thing, man. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's family, he gets a lot of crap, but his family seemed to be real legit. You know,
Mm.
I have a descendant of his living in the flats that I work in, and
Right. We got everybody living in those flats, man.
man, you wouldn't believe it, bro. Like well, he's not the manager anymore, but the interim manager for Manchester United was yeah, he lives in the flats. He's with
He might
Land.
have been evicted because they haven't been playing very well.
Well, no, well he's not management no more. Then now they brought
Yeah,
in Portuguese guys. He was only
yeah,
I didn't even know who he was, man. You
yeah.
know, I was I was wondering like, man, why is this dude running up? He dude walked so I was helping
Yeah,
his name is RVN. It's an acronym for his name. He's
yeah,
some Dutch guy. I
yeah.
was helping him at the desk, and then when he walked outside the door, some dude ran up with a camera like
Oh,
this.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm like, man, who is this guy to Google his name? And then the next tenant came with one of his jersey and said, man, I'm too nervous to ask dude to sign. Can you have him sign it for me? And I was like, dang, man. But that's what happens when you don't know nothing about soccer. You have these people walking
yeah.
around and you just don't know who they are.
Well, at
So,
least you'll never be in a soccer riot.
right. They put a cap on hooliganism, though. I heard it used to
Yeah.
actually be a thing, you know.
Oh, it used to be it really. I mean, in England, people die. They used to kill each other, over their soccer or football affiliations, as they would say. So, in America, soccer is seen as this kind of prissy, suburban, more refined sport for educated people, and in Europe and Latin America, they're murdering each other over their soccer clubs. So it's very much we very much have it backwards in the U.S.
Hey, I know. Take Roxana, for example. Ahmed Al-Jalad and Haytham Sikki, the people who invited us to the ICSA conference wanted to meet with us the day before the conference to have dinner.
Yeah,
She said no because England was playing in whatever cup that was.
The
I can't
final
remember.
for Euros.
Yeah,
I
they were
mean,
playing
the
in the
idea
Euros.
of like
She didn't want
not
to meet the
watching
guy who
football.
invited us to the conference because, and
Yeah.
so I had to
Hey,
throw.
I ain't mad at her. I ain't mad at her because I don't miss my games either. So
you know,
just
but they definitely they didn't understand it coming from an American context because it's soccer. Maybe
But
it's
that's my first experience with Jonathan Brown, by the way. Just to add this in there, when I went to attend this lecture on slavery, I didn't even want to go. I was giving somebody a ride, right? Because I don't go to lectures, right? There was somebody who wanted a ride, so I gave him a ride. And initially, I was going to drop him off and then come back and pick him up, but I decided to stay the whole time. That's the only reason that I heard the lecture. Not that I was interested in going to attend it. But my first time I heard of Jonathan Brown was a friend of mine says, yeah, there's this white boy. He's an academic in Georgetown, and the Arabs really love him. And he said he had an event on the Super Bowl. He said Muslims are so crazy. Who has an event during the Super Bowl? And I was like, I don't know, man. Muslims are crazy, man. Because in America, to hold an event during the Super Bowl, which is a sacred time on the American calendar, is like holding an event on Eid. In a Muslim context. It's just absurd. So I immediately knew, man, there's something going on here, and it ain't good.
So yeah, so people still talk about that to this day. That people periodically it comes up. I was surprised to see it in Dr. Morrow's book, and it
Yeah.
really. I don't think Jonathan Brown ever forgave you for that.
Oh, he hasn't forgiven me because he sees himself as above me in the class status, and me far below him. So I don't even have the right to critique him.
Hmm.
And number three, I've permanently damaged his reputation because now will always be in the public record, Google searches, Wikipedia about him. And four, he attacked me. He said I was mentally unstable, mentally ill. He had his friend Bethany Abramson do a hit piece on me in foreign policy to try to take me down, to discredit the messenger when all I did was transmit what he said. Not my words, it was his words. All I did was transmit what he said. So he has it out for me, and he has spoken lies about me. He said that I was mentally ill. I've never seen a psychiatrist. I've never seen a mental health professional. I'm anti-therapy, actually. So I might be a nut, in fact, but I've never been diagnosed. So I've never been to. If I go, they may quit the profession. Like, oh, this is too much. But he said that. And so for me, when he goes dirty, Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high. I'm the opposite. When they go low, I'm bringing a shovel and I'm digging under the ground, and I'm coming for you. So I had people in my inbox, hey, do you know about his exes? Do you know about boom, 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 wah, 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 wah? You know what I'm saying? So he's careful to play the desert with me now because I have a lot in my arsenal.
But yeah, man, on that note, thank you for
Yeah.
joining our podcast.
Right.
It's really nice having you. We hope to have you again for maybe the next trip.
All right.
And on that note, peace, everyone.
Peace.